One second. There we go. Okay, so who we are. So my name is Michael Sanchez. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a member of the class of 2023 at Yale University. Currently, I'm studying possibly English, maybe psychology. I'm really not sure. I graduated from Memorial High School last year, or 2 years ago, 2019, whatever that was. And I graduated as valedictorian.
Hey everyone, it's good to see you all again. My name is Elizabeth. Currently, I am at Johns Hopkins studying computer engineering, and I graduated Memorial 1 year before Michael, so I'm class of 2018.
So I'm just gonna reintroduce TCAT. I know we do it every call, but I think it's just important, just in case we have anyone new. So TCAT, or Tiger College Advising Team, is a nonprofit group which is meant to help students from low-income high schools that are traditionally underrepresented in post-secondary education, such as universities and colleges, and help them get into competitive schools for free. So with that being said, you've met Max before. He's been leading our speaker series. So Max Kaplan went to Memorial for 2 years from 2009 to 2010, and then he went to Blair Academy, and then from there he went to UVA, where he pursued a BA in political science. I know you've all met him, so I'm just gonna leave the floor just to him.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, you guys have probably heard of me enough by now, but good thing we have a guest speaker today. I'm really excited to introduce. But first, welcome again to the fourth part of our TCAT speaker series. I hope you guys are looking forward to the long weekend, and for those of you who started up your LinkedIn profiles, great job. Myself and the rest of the team saw that you sent some invites, so I'm really proud of you guys, and I think that's really important. So before I get to Chris, our speaker, I just wanted to preview really quick, in the interest of time, in case we don't have time at the end of the session, to preview that we're going to have next week a panel with former Memorial High School students from all different backgrounds, and they're going to talk about their background experiences coming from Western New York and Memorial, and then they're going to field questions that are related to transitioning to college, along with some other topics. We've curated a list, and your assignment is small this week. It's going to be to come up with at least one question for one of the panelists. So we will be sending a blurb about that next week, same time, and really excited for that. So quickly, I mentioned last class to you guys how it's really important that we have this discussion about financial aid and preparing to finance college. For myself and my personal experience, I mentioned to you guys how I transferred from Wesleyan to University of Virginia. And, at one point when I got into the University of Virginia, my parents' financial situation changed, which was going to require me to pay, more money. But luckily, I was able to work with the UVA financial aid office, and they were super helpful. Financial aid, as you'll learn in this session, is something that changes every year and even semester by semester. So it's, really key for you guys to form, a relationship early on when you get to college with your financial aid counselors. And this was really, key for me. And I think it's important that you guys are here on this call today, because if you can learn about financial aid beforehand, rather than me having to deal with it, while I was transferring in college, I think you'll have a huge, step ahead from everybody else. So I'm super thankful to Chris, and he is a big part of why I wasn't as stressed out as I might have been with college finances. And I showed up to the office a lot. We get along, but I wouldn't blame him if he was annoyed with me at one point from showing up so many times. But really knowledgeable on all subjects related to financial aid, and a great person. And, I just want to remind you guys again about what we talked about with regard to organic networking, and how, Chris is here today out of the goodness of his heart to help talk to you guys. And, luckily we've been able to, keep our relationship since I graduated from UVA back in 2016. So, Chris, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself, and really excited for the subject. Thanks again for joining.
Great, thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. It's very exciting. I don't ever have to take too much time to explain to people why I do what I do. It's pretty clear to me why I do what I do, and what I get to do every day working with young people to help them figure out the best way that they can pursue to achieve their goal, which is completing that first undergraduate degree And my job at the university is to help them figure out how to do that most effectively and efficiently, stay on track to graduation, hopefully within 8 semesters or more, perhaps if they transfer, but always with the least amount of debt as possible, but understanding when and how debt might actually be an excellent tool to help you reach your goal. So again, really happy to be here and looking forward to this. I've got a presentation tonight. I'm going to use some jargon, and if some of those terms don't make sense to you, even after I explain some of them, just make a note, and we can come back to that in the Q&A. Make sure you understand them, and I might quiz you all a little bit informally when we get to the end. So just to see that you're all paying attention. I apologize, there's a little bit of glare off of my glasses, so that's just the way it's going to be in the early evening, but here we go. So I do work at the University of Virginia here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I have been here since 2007 at the university. In the last 10 years or so, I've been in student financial services. Student financial services at UVA is a combination of our financial aid office and what's often called student accounts, or at some schools it's called the bursar's office, which is just a fancy way to say it's the office that collects on your tuition and fees and other charges. And so we're a combined office, which really allows us to work very well together in service of our students. I can't imagine what our students' experience would be like, a diminished experience, if we were separate offices and constantly sending students between those 2 offices. So that's a real plus at the University of Virginia. Let's see, there's some stuff there that you can read about me, and it's all true, but a couple of other fun things about me that I like to share when it's appropriate. I think it's not inappropriate tonight. I worked at Amazon back when it was Amazon.com. When nobody just referred to it as Amazon. It was in 1997. There were about 400 people at the company when I started working there. Obviously, I didn't retire off of my time at Amazon, but it was a fabulous experience, and it gave me a lot of great life experience lessons and some great friends who I still keep in touch with today. And I once performed in the circus, so for one night only. So that if you come to UVA, you can track me down and ask me about that experience. So just a couple of fun
Emmanuel, I'm going to hold you to that.
And for a third thing, back when I was in high school, I was asked to sing at Bruce Springsteen's first wedding. It didn't actually happen because they eloped in the middle of the night, but I was all set. And man, it was one of the greatest disappointments of my life, was not being able to sing at that event. So enough about that. I think so. Max, do you have, or Michael, do you actually have the presentation up, or should I be sharing my screen?
You can go ahead and share your screen
okay,
whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Will do. Yep, I'm ready to do that. So I will take care of that right now. There we go. Okay, we're going to go right back to the start. We've already gone through introductions. Can everybody see the screen okay? At least a few heads nod, and then I'll know that I'm in good shape. Okay, perfect. Thanks. So we talked about a little bit about my background. What I do professionally to support students is I'm largely responsible for our financial wellness initiatives at the university. What that means is doing talks like this, meeting with students one-on-one, helping them to solve the problems that they confront. And for me, because of my background and my position in society, I learn every day from students about the difficulties that they face and the obstacles and the barriers that they have to overcome. And actually, that's something that I am very attentive to at the university, is the barriers that we inadvertently and unintentionally put up for our students. And so that's part of my mission as a human being, and certainly as an employee at the university, is to identify those barriers with the help of students, to remove those barriers so that we can make things more accessible. So for example, one thing that we did this year at the University of Virginia, working with our Latinx Student Alliance, we took our pages about how to apply for financial aid for new students, and we had those pages and some other key pages and our glossary of terms. Remember I mentioned jargon earlier? There's a lot of jargon. So we translated all those documents into Spanish and into universal or simplified Chinese as well. So Again, a small thing for us to have to do, but without having a relationship with the Latinx Student Alliance and having forged that relationship, we never would have understood what those, how that was creating a significant barrier. And again, because it's not my experience, my lived experience, I needed that information coming from students. So just one example of where we were able to make a small difference, but think about what that might mean, right? If you were an applicant to the university or a potential applicant to the university, and you're considering applying, but you know, if your parents take a look at the page and they see a wall of jargon and it's in English, and maybe they're not so comfortable with reading English, to be able to see that in a translated format might make them think, okay, maybe there is a place for my student at this school. And hopefully we help them to understand, even if they don't necessarily end up coming to the University of Virginia, but they might gain an insight into the financial aid process that might help them at the school that their student eventually goes to. So I love what I do. That's what it comes down to. Okay, so I'm going to share a lot of information here now. And if you're taking notes, that's great. But the most important thing for you to remember is that it really does come down to you and your family to follow through on financial aid and to get all your questions asked and answered. And you may not know what questions to ask at first, and that's okay. You know, go try to find a friendly face in the admissions office or in the financial aid office at the schools you're interested in. Tell them, you know, even approach them from the position of, I really don't know anything about this, but boy, your price tag looks really high. Tell me why I should even bother applying. And the important thing, as I say here, that financial aid people, admissions people, they want you to come to their school. They want you to be excited about looking at their school, and they do want to help. I can say that for all of the people that I work with. It's a fabulous group of people. We're not in it for the money. I can guarantee you that. You know, we could probably all make more money in the private sector, but we do it because we believe in the potential of the university to become a fabulous institution for all people at some point in time. Right now, it has a great academic record, and it has a fabulous financial aid program, which we'll hear about in just a minute. But we have a lot of work left to do. So we do want to help you understand and help you to land at the right school for you. So bear that in mind. Get your questions asked and answered. Keep asking until it makes sense to you and to your family. Very important that you have that. Okay. Max was really helpful for me in crafting this, putting this together, and hitting on points that are going to be of the most use to you as you're looking at colleges. And I'm guessing here that there's a mix of students everywhere from maybe freshmen in high school or sophomores up through seniors or rising seniors. Yeah, okay. So for those of you who are younger, you're getting a jump on this. Good for you. Cost of attendance is one of those terms that is jargon. It sounds like, you know, it's like you look at those three words individually and you're like, yeah, I understand what all of those mean probably, but what they mean together is what we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. So the cost of attendance is essentially the sticker price, right? If you were to go and look at a used car or a new car and it had a price on the window, right? That's the sticker price. But you know that if you're going to buy a car, you might be able to negotiate the price down, right? You can't really negotiate the cost of attendance down, but don't worry that the sticker price, the cost of attendance, means this is how much it costs. It's going to cost me to pay to go to this school. Financial aid is crucial for most students to attend college. I was a first-generation college student, and I had financial aid throughout undergraduate and graduate school. You know, my parents sent me to a parochial school in South Seattle and for high school. And when I went to college, you know, I had to hustle for financial aid, but it was actually cheaper for me to go to college than it was to go to the high school, but it was because of financial aid. So I got to know the financial aid administrators and got to understand the system there. And you will too. Michael and Elizabeth, perhaps if you use financial aid, if perhaps you do, then you probably have a much better confidence, self-confidence in navigating financial aid now than perhaps you did, you know, when you were a rising senior in high school. So it does get easier, right? You know, you didn't know algebra when you were in the 4th grade. You didn't know calculus maybe when you were in 7th grade. You'll learn those things eventually. So So just keep in mind, very few people actually end up paying the full cost of attendance. And don't be put off ever by the cost of attendance, because schools understand that, financial aid is a tool to recruit and retain quality students. And so don't be afraid, again, to ask questions. We'll talk a little bit more about how cost of attendance and FAFSA help you determine what the schools refer to as your financial need. So how do I pay for college? There are three main ways to pay for college. The first is the best, right? And that's free money, whether it's grants or scholarships, and whether they come from the state or from the federal government, or whether they come from the institution itself. Free money is the best money because you don't have to pay it back. Borrowed money is less attractive, and for students in college, that usually comes in the form of federal loans, and to some extent it could come from private education loans as well. And we'll talk about loans, but we're mostly going to talk about grants and how to make sure that you qualify for and are eligible for all the grant funding that might be available to you at the schools that you're interested in. You could also borrow money from family. Some people will do that through college, make a small loan from family. You're probably going to get really nice terms on those loans, like maybe 0 interest or low interest, and they won't foreclose on anything or report you to a credit agency if you fall a month behind on that. And the final one, of course, is your money, private money. It could be from your parents' savings or earnings. It could be from summer jobs that you hold, or jobs that you hold during school, and whether those are work-study jobs through your financial aid, or just jobs that you find in the community or on campus wherever you go to school. So we'll talk about all of these, but mostly we're going to talk about the free money and a little bit about loans. Okay, so the important thing about applying for aid, it all starts with the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. And that is available on October 1st each year. So for those who are rising seniors, the FAFSA is available in just a few months, actually. You need to apply every year that you want financial aid. So every year on October 1st should be your clue to go in, complete the FAFSA, and get that sent off. Make sure that you have that sent off to the schools that you're interested in. So the FAFSA allows you to send it to up to 10 schools, which is a pretty good selection option for you. And again, it's free. If anybody ever approaches you about completing the FAFSA on your behalf for a small fee, say no thank you, because it is a free application, and there is nothing that they are going to offer you that is going to be that you can't access on your own just by completing the FAFSA. And also look in your communities. I don't know if your high school, if Memorial offers, if any of the schools in the area come in to offer help with completing the FAFSA. Elizabeth or Michael, did you have any experience with that?
Our guidance counselors do offer it. However, it's kind of hard to get it done. So it's easier to do it on your own, but it is a resource if necessary. Okay.
Yep. Got it. And so that's something to consider, but don't be intimidated again by the FAFSA. Just be sure that you're following the instructions pretty closely. And also don't worry, because if you make an error on the FAFSA, your school will actually make the correction on their own for you and report that back up to the FAFSA so that you're getting all the financial aid you need. Common errors that we do see on the FAFSA are things like people adding an extra 0 in places where it hurts them. Like, for example, they might say their parents make $600,000 per year instead of $60,000. That happens, but believe it or not, it really happens. So, look it over closely, with a parent or guardian, whomever's going to help you with this, guidance counselor, if that's available to you as well. And you should be able to get that submitted. Some schools, especially private colleges, I think Yale, for example, is a school that uses the CSS profile. Johns Hopkins probably uses the profile as well. Elizabeth, you mentioned that's where you attend. A lot of selective private schools and some public schools use a form called the CSS profile. It's from the College Scholarship Service. That's the CSS part. And the profile is a really, really long application. It takes a while to fill it out. You can save your work, I think, along the way and come back to it. I've never had to fill it out myself yet, but my daughter is a rising senior, and so I fully anticipate that I'm going to have to fill it out this year. But the profile, schools like UVA and Johns Hopkins and Yale use the profile to help determine a student's eligibility, not for federal financial aid in the form of, say, the Pell Grant or any loans, but for any university funds that they have. So it is also available on October 1st every year, and you also need to complete it out every year if it's required, unless your school doesn't require it every year. Remember I talked about barriers and removing barriers. We've been talking at the University of Virginia, for example, about perhaps not requiring the profile beyond the first year, which would be, it would save a couple of hours at least for students. And it's just kind of a hassle, right? Especially if the family situation, that doesn't change much year to year. Let's face it, most family situations don't change that much year to year. So again, something that we're considering doing, but most schools, if they have it, they'll require it every year. There is a fee associated with completing the profile, but many schools will offer a fee waiver code to students who have high financial need to help offset that cost of applying. We do that. The first year you complete it, it automatically calculates based upon the information you put in. It automatically calculates whether you qualify for a waiver of the fee. But beyond that first year, your school may have codes that they can provide you to help defer the cost of completing the profile. So due dates for getting these in, I mentioned that they're available as early as October 1st, but the due dates or priority dates it will vary by school. At the University of Virginia, for example, we tell students if you're an eligible applicant and you apply with those two applications by March 1st, then we'll consider you for all forms of financial aid that are available at the university. Some schools, I think most schools are around that March 1st deadline date, but many schools may have it a little bit later, could be maybe March 15th, some have it a little bit earlier. Just make sure that you're keeping track of that. But in general, if you can get them done as soon as possible once they become available, that's probably the best strategy. It's important to distinguish it in financial aid between need-based financial aid and merit-based financial aid. Need-based financial aid, as you might imagine, it's determined by primarily by the information that you provide on the FAFSA and the CSS profile if it's required by that school, and then any other additional documents that school requires. Some schools, like UVA, have a need-based financial aid philosophy. So we really don't have many merit-based scholarships, that is, those scholarships that might be based upon your academic achievement in high school. We just don't have those as a state school. Many private schools do, but we're not a school that does have that. So when people write to us and they say, my student got in, we completed the FAFSA, we only got this amount of aid, where do we go at UVA to apply for merit scholarships? And we have to kind of disappoint them in that regard by saying, well, we really don't have those. There are very few of them. They're typically offered and awarded through the admission process. So, but find out with the schools that you're interested in, find out which of them offer need-based aid primarily, or some combination of need and merit scholarships. Many selective private schools will have that combination of need and merit. Okay, so this is the big one, and this is actually a really simple equation, right? So the cost of attendance, which we'll talk about the component elements in just a moment, minus the expected family contribution is equal to your financial need. So the cost of attendance is a kind of a bucket, if you will, and it includes all kinds of charges that come from the university. The most significant ones are the tuition and what are sometimes called the comprehensive fee or the required fee. Schools have a different name for it, but the comprehensive fee is a funny thing. Schools can kind of use it as a catch-all for whatever they want to charge students on an ongoing basis. In general, it usually covers like the access to athletics events or access to maybe using the university bus system or things like that. But it also covers some costs associated with just maintaining the public facilities at the university in addition to the tuition. So tuition and fees, housing, your dorm, if you're going to be living on grounds, and actually there's a housing element to the cost of attendance, whether you're living on you're on your campus or off campus. I said grounds there a second ago. Sorry, that's a UVA thing. So off campus or on campus. Your dining, if you're taking a meal plan or not, there's a part of your budget, the cost of attendance for dining. And then there's other items that are listed there, books and supplies, personal expenses, travel. A student like Michael, New Haven isn't all that far from northern New Jersey. So his travel component is going to be a lot less than maybe a buddy of his who comes from Los Angeles. So the budget is going to vary from student to student, but mostly in those things like travel expenses, travel costs. So the EFC, that expected family contribution, that generally comes from the FAFSA and then other supporting documents. Schools, especially schools that have the profile, there are two kinds of EFCs. There's the FAFSA EFC, and then there's the institutional EFC. And the institutional EFC is always going to be higher than the FAFSA EFC because it takes into account more elements of a family's financial situation. I say always, it's almost always going to be higher than the FAFSA amount. But just don't worry about that so much right now, because you're going to, as long as you apply on time, do all the forms that they need, you're going to be, you're going to be eligible for all the aid that they're going to be able to offer you. So Access UVA is the program at the University of Virginia, and it's we're one of two state schools that actually meets 100% of need. We do that through a combination of loans and federal work study, and the rest of it, the majority of it is grants. So that's the free money that we talked about early on, right? Is where we like to provide the most support, as opposed to other schools where they might just offer you your federal financial aid, and then the rest of it they expect you're going to cover through loans, private loans, or something called a Parent Plus loan. We'll talk about that, I think, in a little bit as well. Okay, so we have the equation, right? Cost of attendance minus the EFC equals your need. But that EFC, as I said, comes from a variety of sources, including the FAFSA and the profile if the school requires it, and then any other documents. FAFSA has its own method for calculating the EFC, and the profile has its own method for calculating EFC. Your school that you're interested in will never tell you all the details behind the formula. The profile formula is actually proprietary, so the school can't actually release all the details about it, but it is applied evenly and fairly across all students who apply. So just bear that in mind. All right, so the EFC, don't be worried if your school says that your EFC is higher than what FAFSA says. That's if it's slightly higher, you can ask them why, what made up the difference if you have a question about that, but don't be terribly surprised if your ultimately your final EFC from the school you apply to is higher than what you get back from the FAFSA when you apply and complete the FAFSA. Okay, comparing offers here. So depending upon a school's financial aid policies, the net cost, you might find as you apply that attending an out-of-state public school like the University of Virginia, for example, if you have high need, or a private school with a very generous program, might actually have a lower net cost than staying in-state at a public school. And the net cost is essentially that cost of attendance, the amount of the cost of attendance that's not covered by financial aid. Every school has something called a net price calculator, and a lot of the selective schools, in fact, I think it's true of Johns Hopkins and Yale both, they use a tool called My Intuition, which is a calculator that will ask even fewer questions than the net price calculator. So your family can use the net price calculator or My Intuition on the school's websites, the schools that you're interested in, to help you calculate how much financial aid you might be eligible for, and therefore what your net cost might be. So how much of the net cost you end up paying, though, is dependent upon direct and indirect costs and how you manage them. So I want to talk about those things as well. So we've got lots of jargon going around here, right? We've got that net cost, which is whatever's left over after your financial aid offer is out there, and then subtract that from your costs, the cost of attendance items. But this is where it gets a little tricky because especially beyond your first year in college, not every cost that you incur is going to be charged by the university. So let's say, for example, that you live off grounds or off campus. The university isn't going to charge you for that if you're paying rent in an apartment, that's going to be an indirect cost. So those are indirect costs, are things that the school doesn't bill you for directly, like your books for your classes, because they don't necessarily know what classes you're going to take. They're not going to charge you for your plane ticket or your train ticket. So that's going to be an indirect cost. And this is where you can get creative about that. If you're, if you can buy used books or rent books, if family are helping you with your personal items, if you're living off campus and you've got an apartment with 4 other friends and you cook all together, you can save a lot of money on meal plans. So you get the picture here. You can control some of those indirect costs and help to keep your out-of-pocket expenditures down. This is what I'm saying, is that this is where you're kind of discounting that sticker price of the cost of attendance. You're kind of getting away with paying less for that cost of attendance based upon your economy, and you're being thrifty about how you manage your indirect costs. Direct costs, as the name implies, those are things that the school bills you for. They're always going to bill you for tuition and required fees. And if you live on grounds, they'll bill you for your meal plan and your housing. So bear that in mind, that you have some control over those direct and indirect, or the indirect costs at least. Excuse me. Okay, as we mentioned earlier, for grants, start talking early on with people in financial aid at the school and find out about their financial aid policy. Make sure you hit all the deadlines and that you apply on time every year. It is the best way to ensure that you're putting yourself in the best position to get all the financial aid that you might qualify for. And as I already mentioned, use the net price calculator to get a sense for the true cost to you. Okay, so everybody wants to know, what's my financial aid offer going to look like? Schools make it up of a variety of different things: grants and scholarships, work study, if you qualify for it. If your school has work study, most every school should have work study that they can award. And in most cases, loans. So UVA used to be a school that for its highest needs students, we didn't have any loans as part of the financial aid offer. That changed about 7 years ago. We're hoping that we can change that back at some point in time. There's all kinds of problems associated with loans in terms of how it puts students at a disadvantage when they're trying to establish themselves after school, and some of their capital is actually going to, some of what they're earning is going to pay off those loans rather than helping them to build wealth and build security. So we're working on that, and many schools do offer no loans packages, so bear that in mind. Work study is money that you earn during the school year by working a job. It's not money that comes to you up front, but usually schools will award you anywhere from a couple of $1,000 to maybe $4,000 of eligibility for work study. We already talked about grants and scholarships being free money and therefore the best kind of financial aid. Loans you'll pay back after graduation if you take those out. Most schools also have something that is a sort of a minimum contribution, minimum expected contribution from the student. So watch out for that and find out from the school if they have a minimum student contribution and what that amount is, because that will probably impact what your financial aid offer looks like and may impact your financial planning as you get ready to go off to college. So some states require that there be consistency across the board in terms of what a financial aid offer letter looks like. Virginia just passed a law last year that required some consistency. Most schools are going to show you, they're going to break down those direct costs and those indirect costs, and then they'll show you what the net cost will be before financial aid and after financial aid. So you have a clearer sense of what you might be looking at as the most you might expect to pay out of pocket. All right, I did say we talk about student loans. There are two main types of federal student loans. Well, there are two really for undergraduate students. One is the unsubsidized student loan. And if you, let's see, the best way to talk about subsidized. So there are subsidies. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, for example, provides subsidies to farmers to help support them financially for producing wheat or soybeans or corn out in the Midwest, for example. So a subsidy is where you're getting financial support on something. So a subsidized loan is the one that is a need-based loan, and it is the better of those loans. Unsubsidized loans accrue interest. That means that you're having interest added to the cost of the loan while you're in school. Subsidized loans, much better, much more attractive. They don't accrue any interest until 6 months after graduation. So if you take out subsidized loans throughout your undergraduate career. And then, you know, the summer after graduation, you're able to pay them off or pay off a good chunk of them. You're really minimizing the amount of interest that you'll have to pay on those loans over the lifetime of repayment. So subsidized loans are generally quite good. Right now, for example, in the coming year, subsidized and unsubsidized loans for undergraduate students have a very low interest rate, only 2.75%. When I was in graduate school, interest rates were around 8 or 9%. In the early 1980s, they were around 14 or 15% when inflation was very high. No, I was not in college in the early 1980s. But the interest rates being so low, I typically try to encourage students to be really mindful about their borrowing and only borrow what they need. But this year, I'm singing a different tune a little bit. You know, one of the things I talk with students about a lot is building an emergency fund. And, you know, they look at me when I say that, like I ask them, you know, when was the last time they were on Facebook, right? It just isn't going to happen. And so I think what the pandemic has taught students is that it has given them a really, really clear image and a clear picture of why you might need an emergency fund built up. And so, as I said, I don't typically encourage students to borrow what they don't absolutely need. But if a student is very disciplined and is able to put money aside and leave it alone, especially borrowed money, I would say that borrowing a subsidized loan at this very low interest rate of 2.75% is a great way to build in an emergency fund in case something happens and you need to access that money. So that's, I guess, qualified advice that I would give students in this situation. And I don't see interest rates going up dramatically in the next several years. So all of you, you know, freshmen and sophomores out there listening in on this, that's probably going to hold true later on. Just use that as a strategy, because if all you do is keep it tucked away in a savings account somewhere, and then you get to graduation and you never needed it, you just turn around and pay it back. And you've never paid any interest on it, and you've always had that emergency fund in case something does kind of go pear-shaped on you. But if you do take out loans, it really is important that you have a financial plan, a budget that goes all the way through your graduation. So that should start from your first year in school. And many of the schools now have counseling programs, peer financial counseling programs, where you can go and you can sit down with another college student who's been trained on these types of things. And they can help you figure out a great budget that's going to include things like study abroad when that becomes available again, internships when those become available again, you know, and all of those things. But it's good to have a budget, because you can come back to that time and again as things change, and you can plan for those costs. A budget doesn't keep you from spending money, but it does help you to know where your money is going when you are spending it, and it helps you. It's driven by what you value and therefore why you want to spend that money. So have a budget, stick with it, and complete your degree, right? That's very important to repayment. Most students who struggle with loan repayment are students who may not have finished their degree or their credential wherever they have gone to school. So that's really important to repayment. Okay, I think we're going to move fairly quickly through the next several slides, so we have plenty of time for questions. And I'm willing to stay as long as you all want me to stay. I'm in quarantine too. So student loans, there are limits on them. There are annual limits and lifetime limits on federal student loans. You don't need to know those right now, but just know that they are out there. The limit for freshmen is $5,500, and that's a combination of the subsidized and unsubsidized. Typically, a student with financial need would see $3,500 in a subsidized and $2,000 in an unsubsidized, just generally speaking. And that annual limit goes up to $6,500 the second year, and then $7,500 for the third and fourth years each. Parent Plus loans, I mentioned those earlier. Those are additional loans that a parent can take out on behalf of the student to supplement. If the financial aid leaves that net cost, they could use that Parent Plus loan to pay off that net cost. Or in addition to, you can supplement with private education loans as well. And you would borrow from any number of banks or credit unions, lending institutions. There's Wells Fargo does student loans. Sallie Mae, which is a government lending agency, and they do private loans as well. So for both of those, a credit check is required. And for the PLUS loan, it's the parent alone is responsible for it, whereas a private education loan, the student actually is the signer on it. They're the ones who are sort of signing up for the debt, and typically a parent has to co-sign on the loan, so they're sort of equally responsible financially for that. Okay. I talked about a budget. I really can't stress that enough. I've never met a student yet who did a budget who, well, two things. I've never met a student who did a budget who enjoyed doing a budget. So let's just get that out of the way. But I also never met a student doing a budget who lived by it, who regretted doing the budget. It's a very elegant and simple way, ultimately, to keep track of where you're spending your money, why you're spending your money, and where your income is coming from, and where your outlay is. So another thing to keep in mind, this is really important. We mentioned this to students fairly frequently. Financial aid programs are not designed to support family back home. So all the more reason that if you do feel a need to contribute to a home economy, work with somebody at your school on building a budget that will allow for that, but also keeps you on solid ground. So for example, it's not uncommon for us to see a student in the middle of semester who may have gotten a refund of say $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 at the start of the term, which was intended to pay for rent and food and other books and supplies and things. And they're applying for an emergency loan by the middle or later part of the semester because they've had to send money home because of an unexpected bill, or it's just expected that the family expects that they're going to send money back. So it is possible to do both of those things just to some extent. But I have a colleague who says the best way you can help your family is to complete your degree and hopefully do it on time and with as little additional cost as possible. So it's a very difficult thing, and it's going to be stressful if that's the situation for you. So do seek out help at your school, whether it's from your financial aid office or the dean of students office or some other support office around the campus where you attend. But ask for that help. You're going to find a sympathetic ear, and people are going to help you figure out a way to make that happen. Okay. Max asked me to mention undocumented students. So more schools, I think, happily are beginning to address this issue, especially DACA students, and thank goodness for the result we got from the Supreme Court last week. And undocumented students, it's a more difficult situation, I think, for schools. They aren't able to move as quickly on that. And in some cases, especially public schools, they're kind of limited by what their state will permit. So as more and more DACA students come of age and attend college, I think that this movement towards accommodations and having policies that support those students and their goals and their dreams. So you should ask about policies at your schools. If you had asked me 2 years ago what UVA does for DACA students or undocumented students, I would have said we don't do anything for them. Our Attorney General in Virginia ruled that they could qualify for in-state tuition rates. So rather than being treated like an international student, they qualified for in-state tuition. And that's as far as it went. But the new president of the university, starting with this last academic year, one that just ended, allowed for the university to channel some of its own funds, that is the private funds at the university, to DACA students. So they didn't qualify. They still couldn't complete a FAFSA because they can't complete the FAFSA, but they qualified for university funds. So we were able to, so for example, there was a student I was working with, she was transferring into the university. She had worked for a while in the private sector, and so she qualified for a private loan in her own name, and for $32,000, right? So when the money came through for DACA students, she didn't qualify for a $32,000 loan anymore because of the grant money that the university was able to give her. We had to reduce her loan eligibility down to around $3,000. And because she was able to manipulate her personal costs, she actually was able to not have to borrow any money at all. So that was a pretty dramatic example of how that change in policy had potentially a life-changing impact on that student. Think about what $32,000 as a student loan ×2, because she would have had to do that for her last year here at the university. So that's something that is really significant. The university just established a policy to admit undocumented students, but there's no financial aid that's available to them, either from the state or from the university for now. So undocumented and DACA students may have access to the private education loans with a qualified cosigner. So you might want to look at that as well, which seems incredibly perverse to me, that that's the case, but it might be a way to access funds to help pay for school. But inquire at the schools that you're interested in to find out what policies are in place or at least under consideration by the schools. Okay, just a couple more slides, I promise, and then we'll move on. But the impact of COVID-19, every school should have an appeals process listed on their website somewhere for financial aid. So take a look and get information that you can from your schools. Bear in mind that the schools themselves are also hard hit financially, especially state schools. They're going to be looking at reduced budgets from their states, probably anywhere from 10 to 15%. So don't necessarily assume that they'll be able to meet all of any new need that might arise, but that shouldn't keep you from asking. Now, if you have had a loss of income or excessive medical costs, have your family save all receipts and bills and unemployment paperwork, any notes from employers, severance of employment, things like that, because the schools will ask for it. So if you think that you may need to appeal a financial aid because the situation has changed dramatically, keep all your receipts, keep all your paperwork in place, and have that ready when the school asks for it. So COVID is also exposing and amplifying existing financial problems at some schools. So that's one thing that students may not be thinking about is, is the school that I'm interested in likely to be here in 3 years? What's their financial situation? Do I want to take a risk with a school that might be struggling financially already, or do I want to go to a school where I think it's more likely that they're going to be stable in the coming years during the time that I'm there? So keep track of information coming out from and about those schools that you're interested in, and about their direction and their plans for the coming years. A lot of students are also considering gap years and gap semesters. You can talk with your school about their policies about that too. If you get admitted and you decide, hey, I might want to wait a year, ask them what their policy is on that, especially with the uncertainty about what return to school, return to campus might look like for the fall. Some students I know at UVA are asking about just waiting and coming back for the spring semester. So something to bear in mind. This link here, and I think you're going to get this deck available to you. This is a link to a game, essentially, where you can kind of, without any repercussions, you can make some choices about attending college and how you're going to spend your money and have a balance between happiness and your finances. It's a fun game developed by a nonprofit out in California. And so play with that as much as you would like to. But I think at this point, I'm going to stop presenting, and see if there are any questions that people have that I can help to answer.
Hey everyone, feel free to just post your questions in the chat. And while we wait, I have one that I'd like to ask. Just thinking back to my offers, my senior year of high school, I noticed that sometimes, which something I wouldn't have expected, was my out of state offers offered a better financial aid package than my in-state schools. Can you touch a little bit on why that is sometimes?
It depends on the schools. Were the out-of-state schools, were those private colleges or were they state schools?
Yeah, I think they were private.
Yep. Yeah, that's usually the difference. Private schools will often have their own funds. They're not constrained by state budgets and state restrictions. So they may have a more generous financial aid package, financial aid program in terms of grants that they're able to offer, merit scholarships. That's where the merit scholarships comes in. So I'm not terribly surprised that that's your experience, but privates sometimes can be cheaper even than staying in state, depending upon, like for example, I'm not really familiar with the program, the financial aid program at Rutgers, for example. But you might, if you're a high achieving student with a substantial need and you apply to Oberlin or Center College or someplace like that, you might find, that you really stand out as an applicant in that school's cohort of applicants for that year. And you might find that there's money there for you that might not be available at a state school, certainly, and maybe not even at some of the other privates. So my feeling about graduate school, and I know this isn't what we're talking about here, but my feeling about graduate school is go to the best program that'll pay for you to go there. And I think to some extent, that same advice applies to undergraduate as well. Go to the best school, and that means not getting too attached emotionally to one school or another. And that's a difficult thing. I deal with families every year who, they say, this is our dream school for our child, but they don't have, they kind of maybe fall somewhere in between in terms of their need. And it's going to be a real stretch for that family to make those payments for 4 years, and they put them in peril. Because think about it, I encourage parents, don't mortgage your future, because you don't want to have your kids have to financially support you in your later years of life because you've taken out so much in, say, a Parent Plus loan or something like that. So I know it's getting far afield, but it comes back to the question of what you were asking is, why would an out-of-state situation be cheaper than, to me, as a net cost than that in-state? And that is because of the way they're able to discount their costs based upon the merit aid that they offer. So, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. If you take a look at the chat, I do see a couple questions coming in.
Sure. So from Emmanuel, when will outside scholarships start to negatively affect financial aid packages? Yeah, for need-based schools. That's a great point. For students at UVA, I can speak to that experience because I know that the best, but this is the same for anybody who has a very generous, who meets 100% of need. So if you are a high-achieving student and you get outside scholarships and you come to UVA, so what we try to do first is so the outside scholarships will impact what your financial aid offer looks like. Expect that from the start. It's not going to be given to you on top of your financial aid. It's going to replace some elements of your financial aid. So at UVA, for example, every student who is out of state, who has need, it gets $11,000 in aid that we call self-help. And self-help is what we use as a term to describe student loans and work study. So $11,000 in self-help. And that's a combination of federal loans and university loans and the federal work study. So if you had a scholarship from, you were coming to UVA and you had a $5,000 scholarship, the first thing we would try to do is we would try to eliminate as much self-help as we could. In other words, we want to take away the loans and make that scholarship have a real impact by being free money, which is what it was intended to be, right? It's complicated in that there are some federal rules about your eligibility for loans that we can't, even if we wanted to, we couldn't take away your eligibility for some loans, but it usually is able to reduce some of them. So I would say that and I'm going to use, again, UVA as an example, the cost of attendance at UVA for an out-of-state student is around $70,000. Again, don't freak out about the sticker price, but it's about $70,000. And let's say you had financial need of, say, $65,000, right? So 11,000 of that would be in the form of self-help, and the rest of it would be grants, right? So you would have to hit a sweet spot with your scholarships of somewhere less than $11,000. And any dollar above that is going to start eating away and replacing your grant money, until we get to, $65,000 in outside scholarships. And that's not very common. So I wouldn't bust it. If at a school like UVA, or school that meets 100% of need and has that philosophy, I would ask those schools too, what's their philosophy about how outside scholarships impact financial aid? Because not everybody does it like UVA. Some of them take away their grant money right away, rather than their self-help. So ask them, if you're going to get outside scholarships, ask them how it's going to impact your aid. And then I wouldn't try to work too hard if only outside scholarships are just going to replace grant money, for example. I wouldn't necessarily go searching high and low for scholarships to apply for. Yeah. Okay. Looks like from Kelsey. What does it take to qualify for 100% need-based financial aid, and what does it mean to be need-blind? Good. I'll take the need-blind question first. So UVA, for example, is a need-blind institution. What that means is that when a student applies for admission, undergraduate admission does not have access to that student's financial aid information, doesn't have access to their FAFSA or their profile. And that means that the university can admit students based solely upon their application materials. And that helps to level the playing field for a lot of students. And so that's what need blind generally means. And UVA does have that philosophy. Most schools, I think, do have that philosophy these days. So to qualify for 100% need-based financial aid, you have to find a school that actually has that philosophy in place. So of the public universities, UVA and North Carolina at Chapel Hill are the only two schools that meet 100% of need for all students, both in-state and out-of-state. Other schools, like the University of Michigan, for example, meets 100% for in-state and 50% for out-of-state. They might give you more than 50%, but they meet at least 50%. So private schools are more likely than public schools to meet 100% of need. And some schools have very clear programs, such as Stanford. I think Princeton has a very clear statement. I could be wrong about Princeton, but I know Stanford has a very clear statement. Even UVA has a pretty clear statement about their financial aid program. We say that any student whose family makes $80,000 or less, whether in-state or out-of-state, will qualify for grants equal to the cost of tuition and fees. And then families making $30,000 or less and have what we call typical assets. That means they don't also own like 3 other homes or something like that, right? Which is really unlikely anyway. But those students would expect to receive grants equal to tuition fees, room and board. So just keep talking with the schools, find out what their philosophy is, and then apply strategically. Michael asks, how is your financial aid negotiable? To what extent? Good point. So the student income contribution. So at UVA, for example, we assume that there's going to be a $1,600 contribution from students. And oftentimes that may be awarded or offered in the form of a loan. So the student could actually borrow money based upon their FAFSA information to cover that. But again, that's where the contribution can kind of get masked or hidden away, depending upon how the student manages their indirect costs, right? You can kind of make it go away. It's not like you have to write a check for the student contribution portion first and foremost. It's just that's sort of cooked into the financial aid offer. Financial aid at UVA is not negotiable. We don't negotiate on financial aid because it is a strictly need-based model. Some schools that have merit aid, you might be able to talk with them and see if there's any way they could kind of sweeten the pot, especially if you've got a competing offer from what they would call a peer institution. So let's say, Michael, that you had an offer in hand from Harvard or from Cornell or Princeton, and you might show that to Yale and see how much they really want you to come to New Haven, right? So you could do that with some schools. Most of the publics you probably can't because they're working from limited funds, and even UVA we don't negotiate on the financial aid deal. So Stephen, thank you for your question. That's a good one. The first part, it's hard to answer that because it feels like it's a struggle every year. It feels like it's hard. I would say it's never been easy to apply for financial aid. I think that there is more awareness of it at institutions and about trying to make it simpler. As I mentioned, we're looking at policies to try to simplify the amount of application materials a student has to provide us after the first year. I think that the applications themselves have not gotten simpler. I don't think the FAFSA has gotten simpler. They've put it into an app. I don't know if Michael or Elizabeth, if you used the app version to complete your FAFSA this year. They had some problems with the rollout of the FAFSA app at the outset. I think there's an effort to try to do that, and shockingly, that's an app coming from the federal government who is not really known for being nimble and up to speed on what's going on in the world at large. But as far as accessibility, I think that universities are trying to address questions of equity and access. I know UVA is trying to do that. I think we are probably, I don't want to say we're doing it clumsily, but I think that we need to have more voices involved in the discussion to make sure that we are actually being equitable and we are providing access, that we're not setting up barriers for our students, or that when we are identifying barriers, we're doing all that we can to eliminate those, or to somehow make them less of a barrier to students while still achieving the goal that we need to achieve. Some of the requirements that schools put up in front of you, honestly, are federal requirements. I would say that probably 55 to 60% of our work at the university is spent in service to federal compliance requirements. And that's probably the same at private schools too. There's a lot of red tape when it comes down to it. There's a lot of red tape, and the Department of Education holds over schools' heads compliance with all of those requirements. So for example, there's something called Constitution Day. You may not have known that. September 17th is Constitution Day. And every school that receives federal funding has to do some event to mark and celebrate Constitution Day. Otherwise, they could, if that became a violation and other violations happened, they could have penalties levied against them, which of course necessarily hurts students. Or they could have, ultimately, if they have a really significant breaches and significant compliance issues, they could lose the ability to offer Pell Grants and work study and federal loans to students. So there's a lot of red tape that we deal with. So where we can eliminate it, where it's just our policy and we can eliminate it, that's my goal, is that we should be working towards that relentlessly and pretty consistently. Any other questions that people have? I'm happy to stay as long as you'd like me to. And I'm shocked that my dog just hasn't gone bananas over something, some imagined thing outside the house. He's kind of a whack job, but so I'm grateful tonight that my dog didn't freak out. So. Max or Michael? Yeah, go ahead, Max.
I know I appreciated the piece you were talking about the budget, because it's something, again, that I wish I would have known about and set up earlier. It's like, now is the time when I finally have done my budgeting and all, and I feel like I'm comfortable with that. But if I started that earlier, it would have been super helpful.
Yep.
So I think that's a great topic that we can include as part of the speaker series at some point to,
Yep.
to do that piece. Because, unfortunately, like this and other things, we're not taught it in high school, really. We don't have a class
Yes.
for it. So
Yes.
I think that's just a huge takeaway of mine, and everything else. I've been through the process, and even today I learned a lot of stuff. So very, very helpful and super thankful.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I think for all of you students out there, talk with your parents and ask them, what kind of a budget that your own household might work from. I have very strong memories of my mom sitting with her little spiral bound notebook. And, some families are willing to talk about money and other families are not, between parents and children. My mom was always really transparent about it. We were a working class household, and I remember her budget included things like the late fee on the mortgage, right? She budgeted in the late fee, but when you think about it, that just seems weird, right? But no, it's because it mattered upon when the paycheck was coming in. It's about cash flow. It's not just about, I'm going to make this much money in this month, and I'm going to have this much in expenses. Max, you get cash flow. You've got to have the money in the bank at the time that the bill comes due. So a budget should have that cash flow as well. And talk to your parents about it and ask them how they budget, and try to get a sense for it. It's not taught in schools very much. Even in Virginia, it's required of high school students to have a semester of personal finance, but it doesn't stick because there's not this immediate need and requirement to put it to work for them right away. So it's one of those important life skills. And I tell people, look, it's not an option to be bad at personal finance. It's just not an option. You've got to get good at it. And that's why I think getting started early is really, really important. I did not. So I'm the voice of bad experience. You know, and I didn't start saving for retirement until I was in my 40s. And, you know, even though I could have. So I've made tons of mistakes, and, you know, we could have a whole hour if I could regale you with, you know, stories of my own, you know, my own mistakes along the way. But, you know, look at starting a budget, even a simple one right now. Ask your schools, like at Virginia, we have a peer financial counseling program where students can meet with other students. Your school may have that or something like that, to get started sooner rather than later. Because, you know, it's kind of like social distancing. At least this is my opinion about social distancing, right? If we all do it and then the rates of infection go down and we all come out and we say, well, what was the big deal? That just tells us that it worked, right? It's kind of like if you have a budget and then nothing bad happens to you financially, that means you won, right? That means you did it. And that's a good thing. It should be really, really boring. Your financial life should be pretty boring if you've got a budget that works for you. So, yeah.
If we don't have any more questions left, I really wanted to thank you so much for just humanizing the financial aid process as a whole. It's a scary process for sure, and it's really nice to attach a face to it and understand that institutions want to help us and want us to attend as low-income students. And it's not like 70K is how much is being expected for every single person to pay. So I, again, just really want to thank you for that and spending your time explaining everything to us. With that being said, this was part 4 of 5 of our speaker series. Our last session is going to be, like Max had mentioned earlier, we're going to have students from Memorial High School, well, students who had graduated already, and they're going to be speaking about their experiences in college and what it was like both applying to colleges and their time in college and what that's all been like, and their time afterward, if that fits. We really do advise that you come to this one as well. I think it's important that you guys kind of see that the college application process as a whole is for people, and it's a hard process, but I think in trying to build a network, it's important that we have students, and it's important that we connect students to actual working professionals. So we'll have people from all over the place, or people who've done all different kinds of things. And I'm really excited for you guys to be there. You could also practice some of your networking skills that we've gone over with Max in sessions 1 through 3. As you could see, even through this meeting, this was very much something that, this is very much something that happened because of networking. So with that being said, thank you so much. Yeah, please sign up. The turnout for this was great. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me, Max, Elizabeth, or Chris. Do you have any contact info that maybe they could reach out to you with?
Yeah, sure. I am available. My email address is C like Charles, A like Adam, D like David, and the number 7, and then V like Virginia. And then it's at Virginia, spelled out, virginia.edu. And if you didn't get that, Max has it, and he can share that with you.
Yeah, well, in addition to sharing the slides in the presentation, for those of you who kind of want to follow something that was one of the slides that you may have missed, we'll be sending that. And in addition, I can send over the contact info. That'd be great. Really appreciate that.
And really quick, I see Ivan has posted a question. I'll be happy to answer. It just takes a second to do. Ivan, there is a difference in the financial aid process between graduate school. Most colleges and universities are focused with their financial aid programs on funding the first bachelor's degree for students. Graduate programs, unless it's a PhD program, there's usually very little funding in the form of grants. It's going to be mostly loans. But PhD programs are where they typically will fund you with a stipend, and they'll pay for your tuition. If you're looking at professional school, like medical school, almost always going to be loans. Law school, same thing. Business schools, it depends on the school. But this is where my earlier advice about go to the best school that's going to pay for you to go to the program that you want to go to.
Well said. I feel like we're going to have another buzzer beater question here.
Awesome. If not, then again,
Okay.
thank you, Chris. This is very informational.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So I guess if nobody has any more questions, then we'll be sharing this soon, and we'll get everybody that information and these awesome slides that we saw today. So with that being said, have a great night, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Good night. Good luck, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks, Chris.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.